Fisherman of Reddit, what's the weirdest thing you've ever reeled hauled aboard from the depths? I once caught the same fish 3 times. 1. Normal catch. 2. Normal catch. 3. Snagged it on the side just reeling in my line. It was some seriously Final Destiny type crap for this fish. Oh, a piece of candy. Oh, a piece of candy. Oh, a piece of candy. Respiratory organs from some kind of animal. Probably from a deer who went through the ice during winter, I hope. Fishing off the side of an emergency spillway with a 30-foot drop in Texas. Using deep sea poles because we regularly catch 50-80 lb catfish and have to pull them up the side. Got something really big, fought it with a friend for close to 2 hours. Finally get it out of the water and halfway up the side, we realize it is a 7-foot alligator. We just cut the line. I was fishing for largemouth bass in a country club golf course pond when I was in high school and snagged something near the deep end that was big, but not too big that I wasn't able to haul it in. It was a dead dog without any hair that had been in the pond for at least a week. I cut my line and went home. Airbud wasn't cut out for golf. One of my friends was fishing about 200 yards off of the coast in Texas. When he pulled up the anchor, he noticed something hanging off of the anchor. On closer inspection, it was a human femur. Now, back in the day, the mafia did have a reputation of making people disappear in those waters, so he initially thought it was from one of those crimes. After taking the bone to an archaeologist at the local university, it was determined that the coloration and coral growth on the bone meant that it had been in the water for around 500 years. I don't know what was done with the bone after that. Till Texas has had mafia. I've caught a dead pufferfish in a freshwater lake in Alberta. Caught an illegal net that probably had been lost with hundreds of dead fish in it on Lake Michigan. Tried our hardest to get it out of the water but couldn't. Called Coast Guard or someone. My uncle knew who to call and told them our coordinates and tied a jug of milk to it so they could find it. I hate to be the one to tell you, but your uncle was a milk smuggler. This is one of the ways they do handoffs. One time while fishing in Florida, my sister spit her gum overboard. About an hour later she caught a fish, and it had gum in its mouth. I crap you not. The very first thing I ever reeled in with a fishing pole was a Stretch Armstrong doll. I was probably 8 years old, and it's still one of the happiest moments of my life. Caught some gigantic octopus up in Alaska, talking 8 feet stretched out, weighing 50 pounds. Also some seriously XL halibut, a couple of 340 pounds and one 350. One of the cooler things I've seen was lingcod who had bitten down on another lingcod who had bitten down on a rockfish. It's not uncommon to have a lingcod ride a rockfish to the surface, called hitchhiking, but I'd never seen one attack another and ride it up. Gassed both and had some fish and chips. The most interesting thing I ever caught was half a fish. I was surf fishing in North Carolina with a couple friends, and the fishing that day sucked. We'd been out there about an hour and none of us had gotten so much as a fricking nibble. Finally, it happened. The tip of my pole dipped, then bowed a bit. Didn't look like it was a big fish, but anything is better than nothing. I started reeling it in, but after a few seconds, the pulling stopped. Well frick, I guess he got off the hook. The only dang bite we get all day and he gets away. But I should check my bait anyway, so I kept on reeling. When it got in, I discovered that the fish hadn't gotten off after all. He'd just had his butt end bitten off by something presumably far larger. I just left him on the hook and cast out again, hoping the big sucker could come back for the other half. Happens quite a bit in ocean fishing. I once lost half of a fair-sized tuna to some monster after 20 minutes of reeling on that dang thing. Tragic. A peed off snapping turtle. It took forever to cut the hook out. I still feel bad about it. Don't feel too bad. Snapping turtles are permanently peed no matter what. Wasn't me, but my buddy cast out a line and went to the other side of the pond to grab something from his car. Didn't have his pole properly anchored, so he's across the pond and he gets a big fish on the line. Fish drags his pole into the water. Buddy is super upset because it was his grandpa's old pole which was gifted to him before his grandpa passed. We see no sign of the pole floating or getting caught up in anything. We decided the pole was lost for forever. Buddy rigs up a new line and literally 5 minutes after he casts out, he gets a hit. And guess which fish hit his line? So he's reeling in this 8 pounds catfish and we see 2 lines coming from its mouth and then we notice another fishing pole. Brother and I do a lot of fishing, him especially. Between us we have caught the same fish multiple times, birds, turtles, people, unknown Asian tourists getting too close on an overhead cast, a sea lion, octopus, clams, crabs, and a lobster. But by far the most memorable was catching the stingray that almost killed my brother. He pulled up a ray that was only about a foot long and was trying to unhook it. It went scorpion tail on him and jabbed its barb directly into an artery in his hand. When it came out, it turned into a gua concert and the blood began squirting profusely put off his hand. He is kinda drunk, so he is just kinda in shock and doesn't know what to do. Luckily my buddies get him down the dock and into their car to go to the air. He goes into shock in the car and blacks out, loses consciousness and pisses himself. They get him to the docs stitch him up, give him a bunch of meds and he goes home that evening. He required a few surgeries on his hand and it's still a gnarly scar. Flash forward a couple years and we are surf fishing in the same spot next to the pier he got stung at. He steps on a stingray and it hits him in his Achilles tendon. I get him to the beach where he promptly loses consciousness once again due to the stingray toxin. I manage to get him up and talking and carry him on my back about a half mile to the parking lot. That guy has the worst luck in the world sometimes. Tell him to start wearing sunscreen. It protects you from harmful rays. Went fishing with a dude who the day before had caught about 40 pounds of pot while fishing off the coast in Mexico. He didn't keep it. Everyone makes mistakes. Fish early here. Caught a lionfish off the coast of Rosarito, Mexico when I was 8. Being only 8 years old, I wasn't really fishing and was just sorta having fun on a boat in Mexico. I was the only female on the fishing trip, and all the deckhands hurried around to look at it before picking me up and whisking me away so that I wouldn't get hurt. I was surf casting near a spot with surfers, but not at the spot where the waves break to avoid them. This little girl about 10 years old runs right in front of my line and paddles directly out to where I was fishing. I ended up hooking her and she was screaming bloody murder. I see this big dude just start running toward me and I was thinking, damn it, this freaking dude is gonna rip me a new one. He gets there and doesn't even look at me and starts yelling at his daughter. What the heck did I tell you about paddling in front of fishermen? His wife comes over and starts a fit with me and he just immediately shut her up by saying something along the lines of, how the heck is this his fault? I've warned her not to paddle in front of fishermen. You need to just be quiet. I was so surprised. He then just looks at me and says, sorry dude, you know freaking females with their dang hormones and crap. I caught a mud puppy once. Large freshwater salamander. It was strange. When we go swimming here, if you stand still they will suck on your toes. I was deep sea fishing off the coast of Pay a few years ago and my dad literally caught a boot. I felt bad for him. I was fishing at one of my grandpa's ponds and was having a successful day. I had about 10 smallmouth bass on a stringer, which is a metal piece connected to a rope that you can put through the gills of the fish you catch so they can stay in the water whilst being anchored to the ground. Well, I threw a line out, looked over at the stringer and it was jerking back and forth tremendously. I walked over, picked up the stringer to see if it was just a strong fish on the stringer trying to swim. It wasn't a fish. It was a water moccasin, cottonmouth snake, biting one of the fish trying to pull it away. When I pulled the stringer up I was sitting down on the pond bank with the stringer in between my legs, so when I pulled it up the snake was about 6 inches away from my dong. The reason it came so close to me was because the weight of all those fish and the snake forced me to pull it fast and hard. I quickly jumped up while screaming like a little girl and got my semi-auto .22 rifle and rapidly fired about 5 rounds in the snake's general direction. I actually hit the snake and killed it. That was one of the scariest things ever. My father and I were fishing in Texas for largemouth. He got caught up on something and thought it was a snag, but he reeled it in and it was a 15-pound turtle. The strangest thing I've ever hooked was a green pike. It must have been sick or something because it was like radioactive green. Another time I caught a scaly man fish. I was fishing with my dad at the local lake and he managed to land a nice size largemouth bass. I don't remember what happened exactly, but I think when he was pulling it out of the water the line snapped and the bass swam away with the hook and leader in the side of its mouth. A few days later we were fishing again and I landed the same bass with the hook and leader in its mouth. I thought it was cool. It just goes to show fish never learn, I guess. Fish are dumb as crap. Once we caught a small fish, put that fish back on the line and threw it in. 20 seconds later we caught an identical fish about 3 times the size. Then we threw it again and we hit a pigeon. Those were good times. I caught a tent and a sleeping bag while fishing at a lake around Atlanta. Someone lost their makeshift home, it seemed. Not my catch, but I witnessed it. Every year I do a long range trip looking for tuna, yellowtail, and dorado out of San Diego. 2.5 day trip. We were kelp paddy fishing. Pieces of kelp that have been broken off and are floating the currents. These hold fish in the open ocean, so we troll around and look for the paddies. Exciting fishing. We slid up on a fairly large paddy that was just loaded with runt yellowtail. Everyone drops a line in and it's instant fish on for 22 anglers. Yellowtail, 8-12 lbs, flying over the rail. It's not uncommon to catch 50-60 fish on a single stop. Well, I was taking one of my runt yellowtail to my bag and once I placed it in the bag and pinned another bait on, I turned around to walk back up the rail and dropped the bait in the water. Right when I turned around I saw maybe a 3 feet mako shark on the deck. I look up and my buddy had caught it while reeling in a small yellowtail. Looked at the tail of the yellowtail and it was just ripped to shreds. The mako held on all the way up to the boat deck. The mako was released. A couple years ago I was fishing on a boat called the Sea Star and caught a sea star. I threw it back and about half an hour later I caught the very same sea star. I know it was the same cause one of its legs had a scar on it. People catch the same fish sometimes, but I've never caught a sea star, let alone the same one twice. This wasn't something that I caught, but my cousin did. It was probably a decade or so ago, but it still holds up as the most interesting and strangest catch. We were fishing in a bay in Mystic, CT when he starts reeling in what he thinks to be a fish. He says it feels decently heavy, so his line comes closer and closer until out of the water comes a barnacle encrusted .22 Beretta 6 shooter. We called the police and they ended up picking up the gun and put it into an evidence bag. We knew the gun had to have been at the bottom for a while and so did they, but they said they were going to see if they could find anything out about the gun's origin. We never did hear back from them, so I'm guessing nothing was pulled from it, but all in all it was one heck of a catch. The rare gunfish. I was fishing off the coast of NC about 35 miles out and we snagged a container used to protect AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles that had fallen off an aircraft carrier training off the coast. I wish I had kept it or at least taken a picture of it. Fishing off Bimini, Bahamas when my deep drop line went crazy. After a 15 minutes fight I bring up a 2-foot piece of tentacle. We pulled in all lines and went 10 miles south. A friend of mine did catch a Cuban once. My sister caught a pelican while fishing off a pier in Clearwater, FL. Tossed her line out and a pelican came down and scooped it. This has happened enough to a group of us with pelicans, terns and seagulls that we say you're flying a kite. One time while lake fishing, I caught a tire with the anchor. It was our best catch of the day. I caught the same fish twice when I was 11. First time was by the tail, left a small mark but we figured it would survive and put it back. I then caught it again through the eye, to which my dad noticed the tail was still scratched. We decided to keep it, as it wouldn't survive, and ate it with dinner. 10/10, would fish again. Crappy animals I've had the misfortune of catching while fishing. Snapping turtle, really small oyster toadfish, foul hooked a snake, non-poisonous but still frick that noise. Pelican, what a fricking moronic bird this one was. I was doing catch and release fishing in the harbor of my town, Santa Barbara, CA, and I caught a barracuda. It was about 3 feet 2 inches, which was huge for my 10-year-old self. It was dead and missing a good chunk of its body. I have also caught half a barracuda. I was night fishing off a small boat in Fiji. I pulled in my line, because I just had something bite, and then the pull had stopped, so I assumed I'd lost my bait, but up comes half a barracuda. Fortunately just a small one. Still alive, though not very happy. Something had bitten it cleanly in half while it was on the hook. I'm a commercial fisherman in Alaska. I was jigging for halibut one day and I felt some bites. As a natural reaction I began to reel it in, but it felt quite small, which was a bit of a bummer. When it finally neared the surface I looked into the water to see that there was no halibut, just a king crab that had his claw pinched on my line. It wasn't what I was going for, but it was still delicious. My friend's dad owns a very large pond and they live quite a ways out of town. With not much to really do, we decided what's better to do than try our hand at fishing in this large pond. My friend tells me of this one very large fish who is very clever. He will wait around the lure you threw in and wait for a small fish to bite it. I shrugged it off, having heard a few stories like that also. We cast out and wait a bit, and sure enough this extremely large fish starts wading around the lure. We attempt multiple times with not even the slightest interest. We give up on this monster and try catching anything else we can. After about 10 minutes and a bunch of nibbles we catch a small fish and try to reel it in. As we get this small fish about halfway into shore, the monster fish we were trying to catch earlier swam through the water lightning fast and ate the currently hooked fish whole. Now we are fighting with a monster fish with the small fish in its mouth. After about a minute of fighting, the line just snaps and the monster fish swims away. It was an awesome time. We were all in shock. My father loves fishing. When I was younger, we would travel all over the US so he could participate in the big BFL tournaments. Anyways, I went fishing with him one even, just a practice run before the tournament the next day. We pass underneath a bridge for cars, and we are fishing next to it. My dad gets his line stuck on something deep in the water. He tugged and tugged and tugged but couldn't get his line free. He was about to cast the line but decided to give it one last good yank, and sure enough, his line became free. He reeled it in, and stuck on the hook was a piece of Jean fabric from the back pocket of a pair of jeans. Again, this was right next to a bridge, like someone had dumped a body there. He called it into the DNR, but I am not sure whatever came of it, but I am pretty sure there was a body down there. I was offshore fishing once, about 70 miles out of the Gulf of Mexico. The water is a beautiful deep blue and you can see really far down in daylight. Well, I hooked a big old kingfish and it was putting up a crazy fight. Their scales are like metallic, so they reflect the sun very easily, so I can see it swimming way deep down. Well, all of a sudden a freaking shark swam up from the depths of the freaking ocean, bit my kingfish in half, and then swam back down. This is also why I will never go scuba diving. Yoink. I caught half of a very large bream in a very small pond. This fish would have been bigger than my hand, but half of it was eaten away in one bite. I guess a turtle probably got it. I once went offshore fishing with my brothers-in-law. I was the only one who caught anything. I caught a crab with the anchor. The point of the anchor went right through him. About 500 yards off Catalina Island I pulled in a bat ray. I was somewhat disappointed because I fought the thing for a good 20 minutes. I thought it would be something way bigger. Turns out the ray just tangled itself up in the line so that I was basically reeling in a parachute through the water. A pair of panties from the middle of the lake. 1. Fishing with a buddy after work in a small aluminum boat with electric trolling motor and we're doing really well. Catching 4 pounds bass nearly every cast. Literally calling our shots. It's getting dark and we are about to head in. I tell him to head to a willow tree that's on a lake point half submerged in the water. Flip in there and get bit. Set the hook. Fish comes barreling out of there. Definitely bigger than the bass we had been catching. I knew what I had after a few minutes of fighting it. Drags our boat for about 20 minutes. I'm using 30 pounds line with the drag tightened down all the way and not moving it. Finally get it in the boat. 40 pounds flathead catfish. 2. Hanging out on a dock at Table Rock Lake with friends. Friend sees a huge gar under the light and casts his little lure at it. Hooks it perfectly where it doesn't cut his line. Spoiled us once. Got it in on his 4 pounds test. Girls wouldn't go back in the water. 3. Fishing off a pier near Gulf Shores and hooked the biggest fish of my life. I was using a Shimano 400 with 30 pounds line, had caught a couple fish, but nothing worth taking about. I see some grey and white football shaped fish the size of Volkswagens, darting after bait. I toss my bait in front of them, get bit, set the hook, hold on, it just kept taking line. Asian guy next to me was losing his mind. I was almost out of line when my swivel broke. I know very little about saltwater fish, but I think it was a cobia. Caught a dead guy on my anchor line while fishing for sturgeon near Portland, Oregon. He had been shot in the head. Police later confirmed that it was a drug deal gone bad. I was fishing in my grandparents' pond one summer about 15 years ago. They had some of those cheap white plastic deck chairs that had blown away in a storm several years prior. When I went out fishing that day, I thought I had hooked onto some kind of freakishly huge pond catfish, but alas, it was just a moss-covered deck chair. Rare elephant strawberry like for good luck, ignore for 11 years of bad luck. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.